In the opening scenes, we see a woman recording an audio about Hap Lake. When you look at this lake, it feels like all your worries vanish from your soul. But as we know, beautiful places also hide darkness. Next we see someone setting a fire at a house by the lake. The woman on the audio is Riz Samuel, and throughout her life, she has been chasing darkness. 34-year-old Detective Constable Ember Manning wakes up in the middle of the night to unfamiliar sounds and goes to check what's wrong. She looks around every room in the house but realizes it's just her daughter, Hannah, who went outside for a smoke. Without her father, the girl feels lost. She knows her mother misses him too, though she tries not to show it. The next day Ember, along with her young partner Hitch, heads to the scene of the fire at the house by the lake. It used to be a summer sailing club, run by Ember's late husband Mac. Experts quickly concluded that this was no accident, but arson. Brad Ashby had threatened to burn the place down ever since the auction when the boathouse was sold to someone else. He could have asked one of his family members to do it. One of the potential suspects, 16-year-old Miranda Ashby, is a friend of Hannah, but despite this, Ember is ready to remain impartial. The expert concluded that the building was doused with gasoline and set on fire without even attempting to hide the evidence. There is a theory that it was done for insurance purposes. Hitch said it didn't look like arson, but all the evidence suggests otherwise. Ember knows that Brad Ashby is capable of such a thing, as are other members of the local gang. The detectives found Brad and his brother, Liam Ashby, in the pub owned by their family. The police asked the men where they had been tonight. They assured that they had an alibi, which could be confirmed by 10 people. But Ember knows they have a motive, as their family initially wanted to acquire the boathouse. Promising to return later, the detectives left. Hitch is friends with those guys, so it's hard for him to remain unbiased in the investigation. Arj came out of the pub and approached Ember, expressing his regret about the boathouse. Arj was a friend of Ember's husband Mac. She said it was just a building. Suddenly they saw Miranda Ashby and her cousin Ellis by the shore. It was clear that something was going on between them. Ember followed the girl, who pretended not to notice the detective. Ember entered the Ashby house, hearing Miranda making herself vomit. Seeing laxative pills, Ember realized that Miranda had an eating disorder. But the girl didn't want to talk and drove the detective away. Ember shared her thoughts with Hitch regarding the arson case. There are quite a few people in town with motives, and the police will need to find the culprit among them. Seeing the daughter with her classmates, Ember offered to give the girls a ride. Since there wasn't enough space in the car, Hitch had to come out. Ember casually asked about Miranda Ashby. It turned out that her main problem wasn't an eating disorder. When Ember met Hitch again, she told him that Miranda Ashby was pregnant. The detectives headed to the pub building when suddenly Miranda took a step through the window in an attempt to harm herself. Fortunately, the girl survived. The detectives went to the ICU, where Miranda's family had already gathered. Her mother Sheena claimed she had no idea about the daughter's pregnancy, especially since Miranda had been rapidly losing weight. When Ember asked if Ellis was the father, Sheena insistently asked her to leave. Ember didn't believe that Sheena was unaware of her daughter's pregnancy and told Hitch. Either Sheena was afraid of judgment, or she was covering for the baby's father for some reason. Next we see a flashback where a guy named Malachi watches Emily nightly from his car. The girl is dressed provocatively, with bright makeup. During class, Amy suggested to her modest classmate Caitlin that they skip school together. Caitlin initially refused, but when Amy simply left, the girl followed her. In the evening at home, Ember told her daughter that Miranda Ashby was in the hospital in critical condition. When asked who the father of Miranda's baby was and how old he was, Hannah assured that she didn't know. But Ember knew her daughter was lying. To avoid further questioning, Hannah accused the mother of hypocrisy, reminding her that she also gave birth at 17. During the night, Ember was haunted by nightmares about Miranda and her jump. She woke up in the early morning exhausted. What happened to Miranda weighed heavily on her mind. Hitch thought his colleague was giving it too much importance. The head of the police department shared the same opinion, wanting the detectives to focus on the boathouse arson case, not on Miranda, especially since her parents hadn't filed a report with the police. The detective spoke to Mr. Ryan, the current owner of the boathouse, explaining that arson cases are rarely solved, so the police usually don't dedicate much time to it. In this case the damage was minor, so the insurance would cover it. Clearly Mr. Ryan was not satisfied with this. Amy and Caitlin had become friends, even though they were completely different. Amy again suggested that Caitlin skip school together. It turns out that the Knightley family is nearly bankrupt, so Amy's parents don't pay attention to her. She drinks alcohol and is left to her own devices. The family used to own a large stable, but now only one stallion remains, named Omble. Amy shared that her parents were planning to get rid of the horse for insurance reasons. During a break, Ember witnessed a conflict between Liam Ashby and Riz, who was accusing him of allowing his niece to have an affair with a much older man. Ember stopped the conflict and asked Riz to calmly explain everything. When asked about the source of her information, Riz replied that as a journalist, she couldn't reveal it. She had come to Lancashire to study crimes against women. It all started with the case of Amy Knightley, which has been unsolved for 17 years. In addition, Riz recently received an anonymous note saying that Miranda wasn't the only victim. It's possible they are dealing with a serial offender. Amy introduced Caitlin to her boyfriend, Maliki. Unlike her friend, Caitlin doesn't have any bad habits. Maliki, who avoided answering the question about his age, believes that she'll change her mind later, as people are like animals, driven by their instincts. Later, Amy asked Caitlin not to question Maliki about his age again. Because of such prejudices, Amy had stopped talking to her former best friend. Caitlin has no other friends, so she's willing to do whatever Amy asks. The detectives met with Kathy Hansen, a psychiatrist. Kathy thought Ember wanted a prescription for sedatives because the anniversary of her husband's demise was approaching. But Ember was here for another reason, to find out about Miranda, who had been treated by Kathy. It turned out that this wasn't Miranda's first pregnancy, which shocked Ember. Late at night, the detectives returned to the boathouse. A car was parked nearby. The detectives were going to look around and call for backup if necessary. Inside, Ember noticed a man who claimed he had permission from Mr. Ryan to be there. The detectives had no grounds to arrest him. They assumed he was a private investigator hired by Ryan. Meanwhile, Riz met with Sylvia, a medium, to try to connect with the spirit of 15-year-old Amy. Emily Knightley had gone missing, but Riz was certain she was no longer alive. The medium noted that many locals believed the girl had simply run away. Without a personal belonging of the deceased, a séance is nearly impossible, but Sylvia was willing to try. Closing her eyes and tuning in, she saw a lake but didn't mention it to Riz. Ember went to the clinic to find her former therapist Lisa, but found out she recently had passed away of cancer. She was now replaced by Dr. Casey. He was ready to see Ember without an appointment. Ember explained that she had been suffering from insomnia ever since Miranda fell onto her car. During her time in the police force, Ember had seen many horrific things, but this case was different because Miranda was still so young. Joan Owen, Caitlin's mother, clearly didn't like her daughter's new friend, but the woman still tried to be friendly. Amy promised that she wouldn't get Caitlin into any more trouble. The girls went upstairs to Caitlin's room. Joan could hear their loud laughter. The town held its annual running competition. Both Ember and Arj participated, chatting while running. Ember was bothered by the fact that when her husband was still alive, he hardly ever talked about his personal life. When Hannah was born, Ember was only 17, and it worried her. Arj reassured her that it was the first time Mac had fallen in love with someone younger than himself. Seeing Riz nearby in the park, Ember suggested they take a walk. Riz believed that the townspeople hadn't forgotten about Amy Knightley's disappearance. She also believed that the stories of missing girls needed to be told. Ember didn't agree that stirring up the past was a good idea. Later, Ember approached Sheena and stated that she knew this wasn't Miranda's first pregnancy. Sheena responded rudely, clearly not wanting to discuss it. Their conversation was interrupted by Sheena's husband, Brad, who received an urgent call from the hospital. Miranda's condition had started to worsen. In the past, Amy stayed overnight at the Owen house and openly flirted with Caitlin's father, which clearly embarrassed his daughter. Later, when it was time to sleep, Amy made an inappropriate suggestion to her friend, promising not to tell anyone. Confused, Caitlin just turned away, though she couldn't get it out of her head. Suddenly someone started throwing pebbles at the window. It was Maliki. Amy was about to leave with him and invited Caitlin to join. In the evening, Ember received a voicemail from Riz, containing a dialogue with some girl who was having an affair with an older guy. Such things happened everywhere. Caitlin begged her friend to reconsider because otherwise, it would lead to trouble. But Amy just left. Ember continued listening to the message, where the girl talked about how this relationship made her feel special. This prompted Ember to take out a box containing her late husband's belongings. Hannah asked the mother what she was doing. They began sorting through Mac's things together. In one of the photos, he was pictured with a girl Ember recognized as missing Amy Knightley. Maliki is Mac. Riz continued her investigation, while Ember couldn't stop thinking about the fact that Mac had known Amy. She disappeared shortly after the photo was taken. Of course, Hannah noticed the mother's concern. That same morning, Ember went to Riz and informed her that Miranda Ashby had given birth. Both the mother and the baby were still in critical condition. Ember was determined to get to the truth and revealed that she had attended the same school as Amy but hadn't known her personally. Amy had been a year younger. Ember offered Riz a partnership. Riz was willing to agree only in exchange for an interview, but Ember couldn't go for it. Before leaving, she mentioned that there had been rumors at the time that Amy's parents had taken out a life insurance policy on her because they were short on money. Riz suggested a walk, sharing that a witness had seen Amy walking toward the lake before her disappearance. Riz had already interviewed Mrs. Cowder, Amy's former teacher, who had described her as someone with little moral compass. But in Riz's opinion, that wasn't a reason to think that the girl was responsible for her own disappearance. Riz didn't tell Ember who she suspected. In the past, Amy didn't return to Caitlin's house until early in the morning. She was clearly drunk. Seeing Ember's state, Hitch volunteered to talk to Sheena himself. Meanwhile, Ember called the Central Archive and requested Amy's case files from 2007, but she was denied access since only sergeants or higher ranks could view them. Later, the detectives observed as members of the Ashby family visited the newborn in the hospital. Ellis, Miranda's cousin, was there too. Some believe he is the father. Miranda was still in a coma. Ember tried to convince Sheena to give a statement. It might help them understand what drove Miranda to take that fatal step. Sheena eventually agreed to speak with the detective. She understood that her daughter was unlikely to survive, so it might be better just to let her go. Sheena didn't say anything specific. After expressing her support, Ember left without further questions. Later, she went to her mother Sylvia's house to pick up the family photo album. Maybe it contained some clues. Looking at the pictures of her husband when he was young, Ember questioned whether her mother had been right in approving their marriage. But Sylvia believed it was love. As a medium, she sensed that Mac wasn't involved in Amy Knightley's disappearance. At home, Ember made the daughter her father's favorite potato waffles. Mac's death anniversary was coming up, and Ember suggested that they finally scatter his ashes. Hannah thought it was a good idea. Today Ember decided to drive her daughter to school in Mac's old car. On the way, mother and daughter listened to music loudly and sang along. In the past, Joan also drove her daughter to school, warning her against being friends with Amy. Girls like her just play men. By the lake, Ember ran into Dr. Casey, announcing that she wanted to end their therapy. Ember didn't want to search for problems within herself that didn't exist, and she apologized to the doctor for wasting his time. But Casey wasn't upset at all. He became a therapist because people interest him. This is also where Ember met Arj and suggested they scatter Mac's ashes at the jetty on his anniversary. For Arj it was a great honor. Mac had been a close friend of his. In the past, Amy approached Caitlin, asking why she was ignoring her messages. Caitlin indifferently replied that she was busy. However, Amy wasn't going to let Caitlin brush her off, and after making a deluge in the school bathroom, called the friend to come with her. Ember asked the superiors for permission to reopen Amy's case, mentioning that a podcaster was investigating it. However, the proposal was met with little enthusiasm. During a lunch break, while Hitch and Ember were eating at a cafe, she spotted her daughter wearing heavy makeup. Ember didn't like it, but Hannah saw nothing wrong, just like her classmates. Suddenly Ember noticed a girl getting into Ellis's car. This girl was in the year below Hannah. Ember immediately went to the hospital, where she found Sheena and told her that if an unknown criminal had hurt Miranda, he would surely hurt someone else too. The Ashby couple made it clear they no longer wanted to see the detective here. Ember once again offered Riz a partnership. It was in their mutual interest, as both were determined to end crimes against women in this town. Riz admitted that she had managed to get a witness statement from years ago, someone named Maliki. Ember promised Riz she would reveal who he was in exchange for the materials from her journalistic investigation. Looking at her daughter, Ember always remembered her husband. Hannah loved wearing the father's jacket and playing his guitar. The girl never expected to learn that she had been a planned child. Both Ember and Mac had lost a parent and were looking for meaning in life. Ember had never told anyone about this before, fearing people's judgment. Ember did eventually return to the therapist, sharing that at one point, she had suspected her late husband of something terrible. But she no longer doubted that he wasn't involved. Later the detectives, without informing their superiors, arrived at the Knightley house. It was clear that Amy's mother found it difficult to talk about her daughter's disappearance, but she agreed to answer their questions. At the time of her disappearance, Amy was staying with her father while her mother was away on work. However, Mrs. Knightley was convinced that her husband had nothing to do with their daughter's disappearance. Mr. Knightley joined the interview. According to the couple, their daughter had only one friend, Caitlin, but on that evening she wasn't with her. The couple also claimed that Amy had many boyfriends, none of whom they approved. When the daughter didn't return home in the morning, Mr. Knightley reported her missing to the police. At that time, the family was going through a rough period. Russell's business was falling apart, and their marriage was on the rocks, so they had neglected their daughter's upbringing. Ember knew that Amy's parents had declared her dead in court to receive the insurance payout. However, the couple insisted they didn't actually believe it. Once Amy invited Caitlin over to her house. Russell didn't even notice the girls because the daughter was invisible to him. Diana, a realtor, pulled up to the house. Due to their debts, the family was forced to put the house up for sale. Amy confided in Caitlin that she dreamed of traveling the world. As the girls went downstairs, they caught Russell with Diana. Amy started playing the piano to get their attention. Diana ran off, and Mr. Knightley began taking his anger out on his daughter. Caitlin was too shocked to say a word. In the present, Ember spoke with Roy, a former chief inspector, asking why Amy Knightley wasn't searched for in Lake Hap. Roy didn't like the question. Ember introduced herself as a journalist, pointing out that there was a witness who had seen Amy by the lake. Additionally, Ember knew that Roy was a good friend of the victim's father. In the end, the former inspector refused to answer why the lake hadn't been searched. Ember managed to find out that the witness was Ali Muhammad. In questioning him, the detectives once again acted against orders from their superiors. Muhammad insisted he had seen Amy by the lake, but for some reason the police did not accept his testimony. He also saw a black car. According to the official version, Amy disappeared on a Saturday, at least that's what her parents said. But Muhammad claimed it happened on Friday. Ember returned to the Knightley house and demanded that Russell tell her where he really was when his daughter disappeared. Ember suggested that, like his wife, Russell had left because he was having an affair, leaving the daughter alone. In tears, Russell confessed that Amy often left the house, and there came a time when she didn't come back. Her passport had also gone missing, but later Russell found it in the house. He hadn't told anyone, thinking it wasn't important. Thus the detectives confirmed that Amy disappeared a day earlier than the official story claimed. But Ember felt that wasn't enough. She was still hoping Riz would agree to cooperate with her. Not expecting her mother to come home earlier than usual, Hannah had brought her boyfriend Troy over. When Ember found out that the daughter had sent the photo of her father and Amy Knightley to the journalist, she called her a fool. They had only just discovered that the photo had actually been taken the night of Amy's disappearance, not the day before. Now Riz would make Mac look like a villain on her podcast, even if he had nothing to do with it. Ember was furious and kicked Troy out. Offended, Hannah was going to spend the night at her grandmother's house. The next day, Ember shared her thoughts with her superior, Morgan. He couldn't authorize the reopening of Amy's case, but he was willing to approve a search of the lake. The thing was, Riz had launched a petition, and it had gone viral online. Mr. Ryan, the owner of the boathouse, came to the police station complaining that someone had vandalized his car. At that moment, it was revealed that Ryan hadn't hired any private detective, as Ember had thought. She figured out that Riz had hired a private investigator when she realized who Maliki was. But Riz ignored Ember's calls. In the past, Caitlin had given her friend a small gift, a St. Christopher medallion. It would ensure that Amy would never feel alone wherever she went. To distract herself, Ember decided to drink. She danced to the same music the girls had listened to in the past. Hannah and her friends found Ember in this state. When Ember realized her mother was here too, she quickly hid all the bottles. Sylvia sensed that something was bothering her daughter. Ember asked the mother for a seance to contact Mac. But Sylvia felt the presence of another spirit, who was asking her to tell Ember that something lies by the jetty. Ember thought it was bullshit and walked away. In the past, Amy planned to sneak into an area where workers were spraying poisonous weed killers. Caitlin thought it was a very bad idea, but Amy just wanted to see her boyfriend. Incidentally, Arj also worked there. Ember can't stop thinking that her late husband might somehow be connected to this story. In the past, Maliki told Amy never to come to his workplace again. When Caitlin stood up for her friend, Amy didn't like it and tore the medallion off her neck. What secret do the waters of Lake Hap hold? Ember received a message from Hitch, who informed her that the divers had found something. Ember immediately headed there. But instead of Amy's body, the divers had found Riz's body. Ember was completely shocked. Another crime against a woman had been committed in the town. An autopsy was performed. Ember still couldn't believe it had happened. Ember went to her mother, demanding to know how she knew Riz was in the lake. Sylvia assured that a spirit had told her. Ember knows that Riz suspected Mac. And if she doesn't erase the voicemail messages from Riz's answering machine, the police will also begin to suspect him. Ember immediately went to Riz's house, where a team of forensic experts was working. It turned out that the journalist's phone and laptop were missing. Ember is frantically trying to make sense of recent events. News of the lake discovery is already spreading everywhere. Since the case involved the death of a recognizable individual, Morgan split all officers into two teams. One would work on the Riz Samuel case, and the other on the Amy Knightley case. Morgan suggested that Riz knew something the police didn't. Someone clearly had a motive to harm her. Morgan, Ember and Hitch interrogated Russell, who said he didn't like that Riz was making a podcast about his daughter. Moreover, Russell had no alibi. Along with motive, this made him a potential suspect. Ember is trying to piece everything together. If Riz did indeed hire a private detective, it might help answer some questions. By running the car's number plate through the database, Ember discovered that the man's name was Gregory Blake. Ember called the number. A woman answered, saying Gregory wasn't here. When Ember started asking questions, the woman hung up. Ember decided not to tell Hitch, who just remembered the man they had encountered earlier at the boathouse. The detectives went to the hospital, thinking that the father of Miranda's baby might be the one responsible for Riz's demise. By the way, Miranda had come out of her coma, and her little daughter was doing fine too. Miranda clearly wasn't thrilled about motherhood, planning to give her daughter up for adoption. Ember advised her to think carefully. Some decisions are difficult but necessary. Miranda confessed that she couldn't quite remember who the father of her baby was. She liked to party. That night, Ember entered the sleeping daughter's room and saw a message from Troy on her phone, who promised to delete the photos. Students at the local school organized a demonstration, demanding that the city authorities put an end to the string of violence. Since the school principal was powerless to handle the situation, Ember stepped in. She urged the students to come forward if anyone knew anything about Riz Samuel. Ember was surprised to find out that Hannah wasn't at school today. Her classmates said she wasn't feeling well. At home, Ember found her daughter in tears. Ember had reason to believe that Hannah had seen Riz in person on the day of the crime. Hannah was furious that her mother was accusing loved ones of horrible things, first her late husband, and now her daughter. Ember feels utterly confused. The police received the call records for Riz. Someone had called her several times on the day of the crime. It turned out that the number belonged to Ember Manning, which alarmed Morgan. Later, the police held a press conference, promising that justice for Riz would be served. Seeing the girl who had previously argued with Liam Ashby, Ember left the press conference and approached her. Ember knew that this girl, Rosie, was Riz's informant. Despite her fear, Rosie agreed to talk to the detective and showed her bruises, admitting that Liam Ashby had done it because of her conversation with Riz. The girl flatly refused to testify in court, knowing that Ember couldn't guarantee Liam would end up in jail. Hitch tried to persuade his partner not to conduct her own investigation against Morgan's orders, but she was determined to uncover the truth. Ember entered Liam's house, Miranda's step-uncle, and demanded to know who the father of her baby was. He said it could be anyone. Ember declared she would arrest him right now if he didn't tell the truth. Liam had a motive to harm Riz because Rosie had spoken to her. Liam said he had nothing to do with it, Rosie was just obsessed with him. Maybe she decided to slander him for fun. Miranda, for example, also liked to have fun and didn't hide it. Ember demanded Liam hand over his phone. Liam did so without resistance. In his phone, Ember found inappropriate pictures of Hannah. Ember was very angry and went to the mother, asking if she knew that Hannah was sending out her photos. Sylvia replied that Hannah had only sent them to Troy, who then spread them to everyone else. Now the girl was even afraid to go to school. Ember was determined to make Troy suffer. She also began to doubt whether Mac had anything to do with Amy's disappearance after all. The mother advised Ember to talk to her daughter, but she was too angry and instead went to the school, accusing Troy of distributing the explicit photos. Ember promised him he would end up in jail, where things wouldn't go well for him. It turned out that almost everyone at school had already seen the photos. Ember was extremely upset. Sylvia told her that right now Hannah needed comfort, not judgment. Ember decided to follow her mother's advice and didn't scold her daughter, instead supporting her. Ember is now most concerned with the unsolved case of Emily Knightley. Morgan thinks she's tangled in her own assumptions, but Ember refuses to back down. In the past, Caitlin started drinking, wanting to be part of the cool crowd. When Malachi and another guy, Joe, made indecent jokes about Miranda, she got angry and left. In the present, Detective Manning visited the Owens home. Joan, who is very ill, is being cared for by her husband. Martin said their daughter decided she'd be better off without them and left. She hasn't contacted her parents in years. However, Joan insisted that Caitlin, like Amy, was no longer alive and claimed Malachi was responsible. In the past, Caitlin asked Joe why he provoked Amy. The guy replied that it was just a joke. Anyone else would have laughed at it, but clearly Amy wasn't right in the head. In the present, the police find out details about Malachi. He is one of the potential suspects in Amy's case. Ember fears that everyone will find out that Malachi is in fact her late husband. Suddenly Ember got a call from Hannah, saying that a man had come to their house who didn't introduce himself. And he wanted to meet Ember in the train station parking lot that evening. She arrived there at the appointed time. Gregory Blake, whom Riz had previously hired to find her stolen laptop, also showed up. Gregory had a recording of Riz's final moments. She had met with the person who stole her laptop. Gregory didn't want to be involved in the case and refused to go to the police, knowing they would eventually find the recording and the photo of Amy with Ember's husband. Gregory had hoped to find answers at the boathouse, which Malachi had owned at the time of Amy's disappearance, but in vain. Gregory advised Ember to tell the police that Malachi was her husband. Additionally, there was a bone fragment among the evidence, which might finally reveal the truth. Ember still has a chance to tell Morgan the whole truth, and she now has to decide. After Gregory left, she cried out of helplessness. In the past, Caitlin couldn't find Amy anywhere. Seeing bloodstains and a knife on the floor, she got nervous, thinking Malachi had done something to Amy. Ember sought advice from her mother. If the police found out she had known who Malachi was from the beginning, she would go to jail. But Ember couldn't just drop everything now. She went to the Ashby pub. Sheena was clearly not happy to see the detective, but the rest of the family was more welcoming and offered her a drink. Hitch was here too. He didn't hide his friendship with the Ashbys. Everyone already knew about Malachi, and sooner or later, Morgan would learn the truth. Ember declared that she intended to put an end to the string of crimes against women in their town. She also accused Brad, Miranda's stepfather, of being involved. Arj offered to give Ember a ride, but she wasn't about to leave, asking everyone there to prove their innocence. Hitch told his colleague that she was making a fool of herself. Unable to hold back her emotions, Ember left the pub. Hitch followed her, apologizing. Sylvia came running in, telling her daughter that the police had come to their house for her. Ember wasn't going to meekly surrender, but the mother advised her not to do anything foolish for Hannah's sake. Morgan arrested Ember for obstruction of justice. In the past, Sylvia treated Malachi's hand wound. Ember's 17th birthday party was coming up. Sylvia wanted to be sure her daughter had chosen a reliable man. Malachi said he loved Ember because she was different from everyone else. Later, Malachi met with friends. It was Amy who had cut his hand earlier in a fit of anger. Now she regretted it. Morgan found the bone fragment in the evidence storage, belonging to Amy Knightley. There was now no doubt she was dead. The police hoped to find the rest of her remains under the boathouse, but they weren't there. Morgan was sure Ember knew more than she was telling. But she insisted she wasn't certain if her late husband was involved. Ember was released on bail and suspended from work. At home, the loving mother and daughter awaited her. They all believed that Mac was innocent. However, Ember no longer knew what to believe. Today was the anniversary of Mac's death, and Hannah reminded the mother of her promise to scatter his ashes from the jetty. Ember said today wasn't the right time. Dr. Casey, concerned about Ember's condition, met with her and gave her a list of therapists he personally recommended. But Ember no longer needed therapy. It was obvious there was mutual attraction between her and Casey, but he said they couldn't cross that line, even if they wanted to. Saying that life isn't a psychology textbook, Ember walked away. In the past, Amy said that her parents were going away for a few days, so she was going to spend the whole night on the jetty with Malachi. Suddenly Amy asked her friend if she liked Joe. Caitlin said no. She was worried about the friend, who wholeheartedly believed in Malachi's sincerity. Something more than friendship grew between the girls. There was mutual attraction. Joan saw something she wasn't supposed to but didn't tell her husband. Ember, Sylvia, Arj, Hannah and her friends commemorated Mac. They asked Ember to say a few words about him, but she couldn't, as the possibility of Mac's involvement in Amy Knightley's demise consumed her thoughts. When Ember revealed that Amy's bone fragment had been found under the boathouse, it shocked Arj and Hannah. In a fit of emotion, Hannah scattered her father's ashes right outside the house. Ember tried to gather it, but her hands were trembling. Sylvia didn't know what to say. Apologizing to the mother, Hannah asked her to prove to everyone that the father was innocent. But Ember couldn't interfere in the investigation, and besides, she wasn't sure herself that Mac wasn't involved. Still, for the daughter's sake, Ember went to the police station, but Morgan refused to share details of the investigation with her. Despite all the evidence being circumstantial, Mac remained the prime suspect. Returning to the Owens house, Ember found Joan deeply asleep. Martin clearly didn't like the uninvited visit from the former detective. Joan wouldn't wake up due to the sedatives, so she couldn't answer any questions. In the past, Joan tried to convince her daughter to break off her friendship with Amy, but Caitlin wasn't going to do that. She was no longer the goody two-shoes she used to be. In the present, Ember managed to track down Caitlin Owen, who teaches at a university and researches feminism. Caitlin denied being friends with Amy Knightley, claiming that Amy had probably run away from her parents and was living a happy life somewhere. When the detective told her that wasn't the case, Caitlin couldn't hold back her emotions. She confessed that she had lied to the police about the day Amy disappeared because the mother had told her not to get involved. All these years, that decision had haunted Caitlin. Ember wanted to know who had taken the photo showing Malachi and Amy on the night she disappeared. Caitlin responded that it was Malachi's brother, Joe. Ember clearly didn't expect this turn of events. In the past, before Malachi arrived, Amy and Joe had another argument. Joe began threatening Amy, saying that one day Malachi would stop protecting her. The conflict was interrupted by Malachi's arrival. Ember met with Hitch. Agreeing to this meeting put his career at risk. Ember told him that Malachi's brother Joe had been with him and Amy on the night she disappeared. Joe had broken the law a lot, now he was back in jail. Ember planned to visit him there, but since she was suspended from investigations, she would need Hitch's help. He didn't like the idea, but Ember managed to persuade him. The detectives met Joe in prison. He and Malachi were half-brothers. They hadn't spoken in years, and Joe wasn't even aware that Malachi was no longer alive. Joe denied knowing the girl in the photo, but under pressure he confessed. Joe had no doubt that it was Malachi who was involved in Amy's disappearance. Joe surely knew that besides Amy, his brother had another girlfriend. But he couldn't know that this girl was Ember. On that fateful night, Amy and Caitlin had a falling out. It was clear that Caitlin was jealous of Amy's relationship with Malachi. Amy begged her friend not to leave, but Caitlin was only willing to stay on the condition that Amy would break up with Malachi. Otherwise, Caitlin would go to the police. But Amy knew these were empty threats, as Caitlin loved her. Despite this, Caitlin wasn't going to stay, even when Amy screamed that she would never come back again. Hitch regretted not standing up for Ember in the pub. She knew he wasn't experienced enough yet. Now he would have to grow up. Ember and Hitch presented Morgan with the statements from two witnesses, Caitlin and Joe. Ember wished Joe could be the criminal they were looking for, but he wasn't. His shock and disgust weren't faked. Ember used to have a happy family, but could her late husband have been pretending to be someone he wasn't? Amy was very upset about her fight with Caitlin. To make matters worse, Malachi had decided to break up with her. Amy was hysterical. While the couple argued, Joe grabbed the brothers' car keys and ran off. Malachi preferred quiet and modest Ember over wild Amy and even dedicated a song to her. Malachi promised his beloved that he would give her anything she wanted. Ember called him Mac. To please her lover, she sometimes took substances with him. Reflecting on this, Ember tried to understand why her mother had allowed it. Ember barely remembered her 17th birthday because she had gotten very drunk. Sylvia only recalled that Mac had stayed at their house for a while before leaving with his friends. Ember was angry at the mother because she had never felt protected by her. Sylvia was very sorry, but the past couldn't be changed. Ember thought that Arj might have been with Mac on the night of the crime and went to see him. Arj, as usual, was drinking heavily. It turned out that he had been in love with Ember all these years. He used to hope that Mac would leave Ember as soon as he grew tired of her, but against all odds, Mac had become a devoted family man. Arj also confessed that he was the one who got rid of Riz, who had managed to obtain a photo of the fragment of Amy's bone. Previously, Arj had retrieved the remains from under the boathouse and reburied them when the owner changed. In fact, it wasn't Mac who took Amy's life but Arj, though not intentionally. On the night of Ember's birthday party at the pub, Mac had left earlier than the others. Some time later, Arj got a call from the friend, asking to pick him up from somewhere. Both guys were under the influence of substances. Arj was driving and didn't notice Amy on the road. He didn't even remember it until the next day when Mac told him. They found Amy lifeless on the roadside in the woods. At first the guys wanted to leave the body in the lake, but Mac decided it would be better to leave it in the boathouse cellar. Mac did it for his friend. Or did he do it for someone else? Ember recalled with horror that she was also in the car with the guys that night and under the influence as well. It was Ember who was driving. Arj simply remembered everything wrong. Mac lied to his friend to protect the woman he loved. Ember swore that she didn't know the truth until this moment. Arj screamed that they had ruined his life. Ember begged him to go to the police with her and confess everything, but instead, he attacked Ember and knocked her out. When she came to, she saw Arj pouring gasoline over the boathouse and the jetty. He was committing this madness in the name of love. The fire ignited instantly. Flames engulfed Arj, while Ember managed to jump off the jetty. Soon she was giving testimony, hiding some details. Later, Ember met with Caitlin, who still blamed herself for leaving the friend that night. Ember found the strength to admit that it was she who had taken Amy's life. Shocked, Caitlin couldn't say anything. Later, the women took a walk. Ember intended to turn herself in to the police and tell the truth so that justice could be served. But perhaps truth and justice are not always the same. Ember faced a dilemma. When she went to the police, she said that it was Arj who had taken Amy's life. For the first time in many years, Caitlin visited her parents. It pained her to see her mother like that. Joan burst into tears, unable to believe her daughter was here. Meanwhile, Ember visited Miranda in the hospital. The girl, by the way, decided not to give up her daughter. Ember wanted Miranda to name the father of her child. Until victims speak up, the world will never be safe. Finally, Ember, Hannah and Sylvia were able to say a proper goodbye to Mac. He wasn't a perfect man, but he was kind, fun and generous. Hannah and Ember would never stop loving him. By the way, none of them had known before that Mac had a brother. From now on, they would move forward and only forward, forgiving each other for their past mistakes. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.